Welcome to the Collaborative Synergy Podcast. I'm Candria Rouser, founder of Collaborative Synergy Consulting, where we believe collaboration drives extraordinary results. Join us as we chat with experts, thought leaders, and change makers on a variety of topics, from project management and business analysis to leadership coaching and team building. Our guests share their insight to inspire and empower you. Let's connect, learn, and grow together on the Collaborative Synergy Podcast. Welcome, Jeremy Berriault, to today's podcast. Jeremy is the author of the book Beyond the Framework, Cultivating Agile Growth. I'm so excited that you're here with us, Jeremy. Let's get started. I wanted to share a little bit about when we first met. We were in an online training at the beginning of this year. I was developing an Agile course at the time, and I remember that you shared that you are an Agile coach, speaker, consultant, and author, which was super impressive to me. And I knew that we should connect and have a conversation about Agile. So I really wanted to hear more about your experience and about your books that you've been writing. In particular, at the time you were getting close to doing your second book, and now that's completed, right? That was released in August of 2024. And so that's the focus for today's podcast.
Thanks for having me.
The first question that I had is if you could just share a little bit about your background, kind of how you got into Agile Project Management.
So initially, when I initially got in, it was about 24 some odd years ago, and it was I didn't realize what I was doing was following like an Agile principle. I was on a project, I was running the testing effort for this huge program within 3 different groups for a company, and before we even got started, because it was waterfall, lovely waterfall, it was already 3 weeks behind. So they were 3 weeks behind of getting all the work, of getting out the door, and we didn't even get a chance to do anything yet. So from there, I started taking kind of Scrum activities to get ourselves going. We have our daily meetings. We'd meet back every week just to see what went right, what went wrong, what could we do for the following week. And we were able to make up those 3 weeks without 1 hour of overtime. So that was my first kind of working view of using an Agile type methodology. And then from there, I just used the similar type behaviors ever since. Like I've gone up to management, executive, I've been a CTO, and now moved on to my own company to help others get to where to see the joys of it.
I have a similar experience where it just kind of happened, organically. I was on a project that was originally starting out as a waterfall project, and then we connected with the right vendors and they brought in the Agile approach. And I really, really like how it changed the way the project runs. And I really got excited about Agile and took classes. And now it's one of those things that you kind of fall in love with and you want to incorporate once you see it work. So really great for IT projects. And other projects, right? And I think you'll say a little more about that later. Great for IT, but even beyond IT, Agile can be used on other projects. So what inspired you to write books specifically towards the Agile project management?
So my first book actually was something to do during COVID. With everything going on and the lack of work, it was, okay, I took the times, like I had nothing much else to do. I started writing about root cause analysis. And it wasn't really, I did have an Agile, put an Agile spin on it, because before it was based off a talk I did for a conference years ago, and years before. And I thought, okay, I could probably spin this into a book. I initially started off as a blog, and it just got bigger and bigger and bigger, and I published it. And the second book, it came about, I think I started writing it 2 years ago, and I started thinking about it probably right after I wrote my first one. And it was more, a lot of people were kind of getting stuck on the actual frameworks. Like, okay, we're doing Scrum, so we have to do these, at the time they called ceremonies until they changed it, more events. We have to have these work products. This is what we need to do. For SAFe, this is what we need to do. We do this, 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 this. And I started seeing more that it was really the behaviors in the background that need to be adjusted or looked at, because the one analogy I always use is you don't use a hammer to put in a screw. So if you don't have the right behaviors, you don't have the right, regardless of the tool, you're going to have problems with it. So I started focusing, when I focused writing in this book, it was that in mind, to show that get the behaviors in the back end sorted, and then regardless of the framework, you can get it to work.
Yeah, it's interesting with Agile. A lot of times I find it's more of a hybrid, right? You have a toolbox full of tools, and depending on your project, you're going to pick the tool that works best, and you're going to make it your own flavor, right? Of Agile.
Yep.
Kind of like when you're cooking, you're gonna take a little bit from each of the different spices and make your own specialty cuisine. So you talked a little bit about writing books in general, and then you also talked a little bit about your new book, Beyond the Framework. Did you have anything else you wanted to share on that before we went to the next question?
Beyond the Framework was, again, that took about 2 years to get through, and it was really, and I know we'll get into it a little bit more in the next little bit. Now that I've written my second one, I think I've gotten the bug. So now I'm starting to look at my third one and going forward. So it'll be interesting to see what goes on in the next couple of years.
That's awesome. I'm excited. Can you share some of the key experiences or insights that shaped the content of this particular book?
So what really shaped it was a lot of the focus was how teams use the framework and how like they so we bring in agile coaches and help the teams work the framework and get through. And really, when I started looking at this book and started looking around and doing some research, it was there's a lot of stuff that has to happen in the back end and building from a foundation perspective for an organization for it to for this to get the value that you need to have when you want to move into an agile environment. And one of the aspects within the book that I really emphasize, I always say agile environments. I don't say agile as a word on its own. I don't treat it as a noun. But when I did a talk at Agile 23, that was one of the things I brought up. It was that Dave Thomas, one of the signees of the Agile Manifesto for software development, he did a talk in 2015 and said that it's always been an adjective. We need to treat it as an adjective where it's just a noun and then it just becomes a buzzword. So that was one of the main purposes of the book. I wanted to kind of get back into what Dave was talking about. Like, okay, let's use it as so we have agile development teams, we have agile management, agile leadership, agile executives. Like use that as the adjective on how that organization or team is going to get their work done so that they're more adaptive and efficient.
That makes sense. In your book, you emphasize the importance of creating a truly agile environment. Can you elaborate on what that means and why it's crucial?
So what I meant by that was to, like I said, to build out the foundation so that agile environments can succeed. And I can actually, even now, I'm starting to call them agile ecosystems. And it's where everything needs to kind of work together for everything to kind of survive and thrive. When I did my talk in Agile 23, I talked more about evolution because a lot of organizations, they really care. And I understand there has to be a maturity model. They want to be mature in what they do and how they do it. But from an agile environment perspective, it's really about evolution. That's how you're like the continuous improvement. You're always evolving. So the aspect of this book and is to help the organization set themselves up so that they can evolve, so they don't get too stuck into their own ways. I just finished reading J.J. Sutherland's book, the Scrum Field Book, and one of the things he brought up, and I truly believe, is that like you always like all rules and processes should be questioned. Like you should never take it saying, okay, oh, we've done this 10 years ago, we're going to keep doing it. We should always question those things, those processes, to make sure that does it still exist now? Like, can we change it so we can get better at what we do? And the way the book is written is to set things up from leadership, HR, like even support all the way across an organization, and how they can build that foundation so that they just continuously evolve and get better at what they do.
I love that book. I think it's the same. I think it's the same one I used in my training that I was building when we first started talking. So exciting that we're picking the same books even. That's great. How do you differentiate between simply implementing a framework and fostering a culture of agility?
So simply to just implement a framework, a lot of organizations, they'll okay, everyone's going to Scrum training or whatever framework they're using. They're doing that framework, and they would have someone come in and it's like, okay, make sure you're doing this, and kind of showing the value and getting things across. And I think that's great and all, but if you have, like, say, an HR group and set of processes and frameworks in the back end where it's still more leaning towards traditional and how they react and how they get the work done, even just to bring in employees to train and stuff like that, that's just going to slow things down. And when it gets into that team, that agile team that's trying to work within the framework, there's always going to be stumbling blocks, and it's going to eventually, yes, with their retrospectives, they will get better. Things will get better as they go along. But if you can kind of get that lean, agile framework and just mentality and behaviors beforehand, then you just hit the ground running. So instead of like, oh, I think one of my examples is we had a team where a new developer came in and they were finding that this developer was having the same type of error of codes with their work going forward. And then they finally initially fixed it, like looked at it and they fixed it and the developer got better. But when we took a deeper look at it, we found that the whole onboarding kind of package and training that was done missed that type of component. And if we would have shown them that component beforehand, then we probably wouldn't have had a series of errors going forward. So we could save time in doing stuff sooner.
That makes sense. We've had a few projects where onboarding, when we really looked at it, there were a lot of opportunities for us to improve upon, how those people were brought into the project and what they knew about the project so that we weren't repeating the same mistakes and we were aligning on the framework that we've chosen and our flavor of Agile that we were using. And so it's a good place to look if you're starting out and trying to really improve your process.
And even like, so even from HR, you can even look at finance and how projects and how the money's being passed around and how they deal with their work and how they make them more effective and efficient. I think one of the things, I just started reading a book on how to change the budgeting. So it's called Beyond Budgeting. And it's basically saying, instead of having a fixed dollar saying, oh, this project's going to cost 100,000, continuously look at it and say, okay, do we still need to shift the money there, or did something come up where we can put the money somewhere else and start taking advantage of something? So instead of kind of being locked in with a certain amount of dollar amount, you can shift things around so that you are being agile and you can start taking advantage of opportunities instead of letting it go by because you're so hard fixed on, this is the budget for this. Okay, we're not going to look at that because we're spending the money on this project here.
Budget's a tough one on projects, especially when you're used to that waterfall and, very set budget and set requirements. And now you're going into Agile where it's supposed to be a little bit more flexible and people have to adapt and get used to that. It's a tough change, but it's a good one if you can do it.
Yeah, it is. And like throughout my career, I don't think I've ever seen a project they would say, oh, it's budgeted at X amount, that it ever hit X amount. So if you're a little more flexible with it, then you're flexible with it, and the teams are flexible too, chances are you will get that work done faster, but you'll also have higher quality and also take advantage of any opportunities that come up while you're developing it.
Right. You're really looking at what's going to add value, not just checking the box that you did the requirement, right? Yeah. So you may find in there was something that you didn't expect that actually works better than what you had originally wanted in your requirements, and maybe you don't need that anymore, and you can save money there by not developing something that they're not really going to use, or maybe wouldn't be as great as where you are with whatever the product you're building offers. So
yep, I had a team I worked with where there was a set of requirements that came in, regulatory requirements for a specific type of report, because it was a U.S. healthcare software, and it came out and they're like, oh, we need to generate this type of report. And so they're working on the requirements. The team was going through, and every once in a while, I kind of, not as a scrum master, but I just kind of listen in and hear what's going on. And I just asked them, it's like, well, what is this for? Like, what's the difference between this report and the reports that we currently have? Well, they gave me a list, and I didn't know much about the reports. As a Canadian, I don't know much about some of the stuff, but I listened in, and I just started to ask questions like, well, don't we have filters? Like, couldn't they just make certain, like, do we already have the information there? And they're like, yeah. Like, okay, well, if we just add in a filter, wouldn't they get that report? And they kind of thought about it for like 5 minutes, and they're like, yeah, we can. So we're actually, instead of waiting 2-3 weeks for it to go out to our clients, our product owner was able to go out to the clients with a quick email saying, you want this report, you just need to do this, set these filters, and you get your data. So we were able to save like 2 weeks of work within 2-3 weeks of work within like 5 minutes.
I bet they appreciate that. Nice to save time and effort and money. So can you provide some real world examples of organizations, and you just shared one, but any that have successfully adopted the principles outlined in your book?
So yeah, it was based off, a lot of the stuff that I did within my book was based off my last kind of career, corporate type career, where I was like an acting CTO. We took the organization and just started. They had 8 Scrum teams at one point. Eventually, over time, just due to financial reasons, we had some of the teams were dropped, and I think we ended up towards the end like 6 different teams. So we had 2 gone. And what was happening was they had a lot of kind of churn and a lot of kind of back and forth to figure things out. And I started taking the stuff that I wrote in the book. It was more as like, okay, we got to make things better. That's how I thought about it. And I started changing how the finance team was looking at things, how the support was dealing with stuff, how like just to do some small things here and there and change kind of the behaviors in the back for all the executives in the back end. And they had this one large project that they wanted to get done. It was initially estimated at being 2 years. It was going to take 2 years to get everything they wanted to get done. But within 8 months, we had about 80% of that project done. Unfortunately, the parent company sold the organization. But I think what everyone got out of it was that if they kind of keep these behaviors and have the executives show these type of behaviors, that they could start getting better at what they do and being less frustrated as well, because that's what was happening. Everyone was seeing like was looking at the whole end goal, and they weren't looking at how to take it piece by piece by piece and finding those little values, like the one regarding that one report. That's how that came about, was just asking the right questions instead of like having someone develop and test a certain report, just put in a couple filters. Hey, we're done. And we got that out of the way. So we are starting to find how to get some of that work done sooner by just asking those right questions.
I think on the projects that I've been part of, it's been really helpful to kind of have that sponsor or executive leadership time where you give them some customized agile training to help them understand their role, the mindset that they need when you have an agile project, and how they can help sponsor and help the project to really take off and gain all the value that you get in an agile project if you're using all the principles and applying all of the practices correctly. So it sounds like you do that as well on your projects. Take that time to help them to get on board and to understand their role and to understand the team's role so that they can be successful. That's good.
Yeah, like a lot of the executives and stuff that individuals I've dealt with, leaders I've dealt with, was more they sort of understood what it meant to be a servant leader and to be in an agile environment. And I think part of it was they just couldn't kind of wrap their heads around to get there, because it was more, it's like, what do you mean the teams can make decisions on their own without me? And one of the things that kind of I always teach and show executives is like, okay, you're an executive, you're a VP, a CTO, CEO, whatever. You should be very strategic in what you do and how you get your teams to work, correct? And they're like, yes. So why do you worry about all the tactical stuff, like all the stuff, like the day-to-day stuff? If the teams can make the right decision, if you give them the right guidance and goals and say, here's your goal post, follow within these guidelines, and then if you have any issues you need to escalate, then you can bring them to me. And once they saw that, they're like, oh, okay. And I go, yeah, now you can start thinking about kind of future focused and get things all sorted out. You still have to understand some tactical, but you don't have to spend like 6 hours of your day in meetings to worry about stuff, where you just let the teams deal with it.
That's a great feedback for them to hear and to think about.
Yeah.
You've kind of touched on this in the last conversation with them, but what are some common challenges organizations face when they try to move beyond frameworks, and how can they overcome them? So we talked a little bit about you
Yep.
can spend time educating the sponsors and helping them to understand their role, but what else do you have?
A lot of things I'm finding is there's like a lot of cognitive bias and logical fallacies that happen. And it's not, there's no fault of anyone. It's just like everyone has their maybe a view or a bias on how certain things work. Like a lot, I remember years ago, people were talking about like agile, I'll put it in quotes, like capital E agile. And they're calling it fragile because it's like, oh, it's ad hoc. It's like, oh, it's like beyond Thunderdome. It's just, it's, it's a free for all. And really it's not. And they're saying that there's no restrictions. There's no, like, it's not very restrictive. But if you really, really look at how an agile environment should be, it is more restrictive than, not restrictive, but there's more discipline needed in place for it to work properly than it would be in a traditional environment. Most traditional environments, because you're going top down and it's kind of, there's always someone kind of lurking over giving the rubber stamp, there's always, there's a lot less, there's a lot more caution in how things get kind of put through when you have the teams kind of making those decisions. And but they have to be very, very disciplined to not just take everything and go hog wild. They have to understand that, oh, if I develop code, I have to have my unit test. I have to make sure for what we call a definition of done, that everything is done according to what we've all done. I'm just not going to write code and throw it over a wall. So there is a lot more discipline involved in an agile environment. And like those logical fallacies, those cognitive bias kind of come into play. It's like, well, if this is what happened in company A, so it's going to happen the same way in company B. It's like, no, they're two separate companies. And the only way it's going to happen is if you take the same people from company A and put them in company B, and they're just going to do the same thing. So it's understanding how those behaviors work and kind of dealing with those cognitive bias. And then once you get rid of those, everything else should be pretty much smooth sailing or smoother sailing.
Yeah, it's funny. I often say, people are like a chemistry experiment, right? You don't know how they're going to interact and how that mix is going to go till you do it. And
Yeah.
if you bring something new into that, you get a totally different outcome potentially. So different people, different outcome, different project, different outcome, different framework,
Yeah.
methodology, whatever. You get something different, and so you can't always assume that what happened in the past is going to repeat.
Well, and also, and that was one of the things I put in towards the end of the book, because after our training, we did the everything disc training. It really kind of, I had an idea, but it really opened my eyes. So, unfortunately for my publisher who thought the book was going to be done, I'm like, nope, I got to rewrite a few things. So I started putting in like kind of this framework, and it was more saying it's like we have to understand how each other disseminates information. And I think that's the other issue that happens is that yes, you can have a team of 8 people together. Maybe they've been working together for like a few years. They still may not understand how each other works. We've done the disc training, so I got my disc style. I'm like a dominant. I'm surprised my dot was still in the circle to a point. With that, like when people hear me talk, if I'm just talking the way I am, like I normally am, I'm just straight to the point. Here, let's get this done. Let's move. Let's move. Let's move. But for me, over the years, I've understood that not everyone talks like I do. Not everyone takes information like I do. So I guess started using kind of that type of those different behaviors and understand how to talk to everyone before I even kind of officially started learning about it. But I think I wrote that in the book is like, we have to understand how everyone talks. We have to understand how everyone takes in information. We have to understand how everyone works. Once we get that, then you can gel and then everything just kind of flows through.
Yes, that was a really good training. I enjoy using DISC and Strength Finder and Platinum Rule and a bunch of other tools that help
Yep.
me to get to know my teams, get to know their personalities, help them to work through, potential issues that could come up when we have different styles, and to understand that there's no right style. We all
Yeah.
contribute to making it better, and we each bring our strengths, and that's part of what makes it better, right? So
Yep.
I'm glad you incorporated that in. I do remember you mentioning that you were going to go back and do that, so that is good.
Yeah. Like I said, my editor was not happy, but oh well, it was just a couple extra months.
You got there. That's what counts, right?
Yeah.
So, how important is the mindset and culture in achieving true agility, according to your book?
It's critical. It has to happen. Um, it's what the way I put it is that you have to basically shift everything of how you do things, like and maybe not how you do things, but like your behaviors behind it. Because there might be ways you do stuff, like things are being done where it's just that's the best way to do it. Great. But understanding the behaviors so that over time you can start questioning those processes and those flows, like, hey, why don't we try something a little bit different? Could we make things a little bit better? And that's where I kind of you want that culture where it's like, hey, guys, like we're all here to make things better. We're all here to help each other and to make the more the company succeeds, the more everyone else succeeds. So if we all get our collective intelligence and our collective experience together, like sky's the limit. So and that's where I kind of come in with the culture. Is like you don't want like kind of strict, like even in the military, it's not like yes they have a strict hierarchy obviously with the ranks and that, but if you look at the book Extreme Ownership by Jocko Willink, he talks about how in the military they use almost agile type techniques and say here's the guidelines, here's the goal for the mission, achieve that goal, and then they would go and achieve the goal. So it's decentralized command, and organizations can do the same thing and still have that success. It's usually when you have that command and control and very strict processes and say this is how you have to do it. That's where things start getting in the way, and either people will just not be innovative, they won't be motivated, and they'll just kind of plug away and it's like, oh, I'm just collecting my paycheck every 2 weeks or a month. That's all they care about.
Yeah, I notice on teams if they feel like they own part of it, that they're contributing, that they're adding value, that they have buy-in in the decisions, that it's truly a team effort. You have a really strong team there that works
Yep.
well, that tries hard, that's going to accomplish great things together. So Agile's set to help with that.
Yep.
What strategies do you recommend for leaders to cultivate an agile mindset within their teams?
One of the things they need to learn to do is to let go. Any of us that are parents, the joke is like cut the cord, even though like they're 18 years old or 19 years old, and you're still kind of hovering over them. It's like, no, cut the cord, let them go. And I think that's probably the main thing leadership needs to look at is like, let the teams do, like, give them, like, trust in them and what they can get done. And I remember talking to a few leaders over time. They're like, you'd say something like that, and they would just kind of shake their heads, like, nope, like something happened 2 or 3 years ago that something messed up, and I have to pay attention to everything that has to happen. And yeah, okay, there was an incident. I was even part of a team where there was a huge incident. I myself decided to, at the keystroke on a mainframe system, I wiped out 3/4 of a database by accident. And yep, made that mistake. If I only made that mistake once, the manager I had at the time was very, very kind of controlling and like hovering over my shoulder, making sure I wasn't making a similar mistake. And it did get to a point where I just kind of turned around. It's like, I'm good. I don't need, let me, trust me, I can do the work. I don't need everyone sitting over me. Um, now, unfortunately, well, it's fortunate for me, I found another position, I found somewhere else where I was able to get that trust and learn and keep learning and building. But I think that's where leaders need to start focusing on is the very first thing is just kind of go at arm's reach, like give them the guidance, and give them the goals, let them take the ball and run with it, and they will be surprised. They will get the work done, much like my example of we used the teams to get that 2-year project where 80 was done in 8 months. Just us letting the teams go and do the work. and they got it done.
Where do you see the future of Agile project management heading, and how does your book address these future trends?
So where do I see Agile going from here? I see us similar to a LinkedIn article I wrote just a little while ago about fixing the system and how organizations over the years have taken piece by piece by piece different type of styles and way to do things and kind of pieced it all together. So Frankenstein's monster, and something got created. It's working to a point, but it's still cumbersome and slow. I think now we're going to go into what a colleague of mine said just a little while ago, a refactoring. We're going to go in and almost take a look at how everything is all tied together and make it better. And I think from there, it's just going to improve and evolve. And I think that's why, like part of the book where I talk about evolution is in doing that, is just evolving all the processes and the organization as a whole better and better and better. And that's the main point. I think if you ever see the quote of like be 1% better than you were the day before, if everyone does that, they will be 36 times better than what they were a year before, the previous year. So it's just small increments that will get better. We just got to get there.
Continuous improvement is a good thing. Are there any emerging practices or technologies that you believe will significantly impact Agile methodologies?
I think probably the biggest thing right now, and it's the nice shiny object, is AI. I think AI is going to help not just anything from an agile environment perspective. I think it's going to help everyone from everything. It's the opportunity to make things, to kind of take some of the stuff that would take hours to do, to get it done within like a half hour or with under an hour. I think that's going to really help make things better for everyone. Do I see it kind of taking jobs away? Yes, obviously, anything with new technology, there's always the opportunity of jobs being taken away, where there's going to be more jobs created because of it. If we think about like what happened at the beginning of the 20th century with the automobile came out, no one needed horse and carriage anymore. But we needed people to build the cars and to go on the assembly lines. So anytime any sort of new innovation comes out, there's a lot more opportunity than what it takes away.
Makes me think of the ProSci training that I took, where, whenever there's change, it can be hard to accept and embrace, and really helping people understand, be aware of what the change is, the desire for that change, their own desire, what's in it for them, but also what's in it maybe for the organization that they're part of, and then giving them the knowledge they need to be successful. So in the case of AI, helping them to understand what it is, how to use it, how is it beneficial, if there's any restrictions that they need to be aware of, and then showing them, giving them the opportunity and the ability to apply it and think about it, and then reinforcing that. So that ProSci ADKAR concept is really important as we try to help people come along and embrace change and learn how it brings value to them as an individual, because change starts at the individual level, they'll tell you. And also, with each individual, it becomes part of the culture and the group that they are in, whether it's a large or a small company.
Yeah. Well, and it's interesting, like my oldest son is currently in culinary school, and one of his courses, he showed me this video. It was I think it was called Earth something. And one of the things that really stood out to me was, yes, the planet's been around for billions of years. And if you look at the amount of change that's happened in 200,000 years on our planet, a lot of things, like what means is just more change is coming. And everyone adapts and the environment adapts. And I think that's why I like saying agile environments, because we're going to adapt. The ecosystem is going to adapt. It's going to function. It's going to get things done. And that's where we're going to head towards.
What advice would you give to readers who are new to Agile and want to implement the concepts from your book?
Small chunks at a time. I think the way I wrote the book was you could do things in order. Like if you go from like the first chapter all the way to the end, it kind of progresses along. If there's a part in the book you kind of want to jump to ahead of time, you can. It's not that critical that you follow that order because each one, what I did was I created a workbook at the end with a bunch of questions. The point was to help you see where there are potential gaps and where things need to start working on. And then once you start answering those questions, take into account what you've just read in that particular chapter. Now you should be able to kind of see it's like, oh, now we can start looking at it in this frame and start kind of how we can fix this, fix that. But it is taking like one piece at a time. And I think any sort of transformation, I think the biggest key thing is just making sure that like you're looking at the behaviors and you're changing those particular behaviors for the better.
I like that you offer kind of the linear logical flow for people who are trying to understand the concept. For some people, that's just an easier way to learn. But then once you get
Yep.
that concept and you've been able to kind of think through how it applies to you, you can pick and choose and jump around kind of that popcorn thinking approach to the things that are going to add the most value as you're trying to improve.
Yep.
Because as we improve, we can't always just improve everything, right? We're going to pick the things that add the most value or that need
Yep.
improvement first and then come back, do our retrospective, think about it again, find more improvement opportunities, and then apply other ones. And maybe they're the same opportunity they came up, but now they're a higher priority on the list. And so we can jump in at
Yep.
that point. That's a
Yep.
helpful way to put the material together.
Yeah, like my readers is a good friend of mine. He bought the book. I was thankful for that. And part of his feedback was, "Oh, I didn't really like the first few chapters. Like I didn't think there was anything I could use." And I understood. Like I knew where he was coming from, and then I knew kind of maybe there are some parts where it's like, okay, I've heard this before, or we've done something similar. Maybe he has a little bit of bias towards those particular chapters. But then he got to, I think it was like chapter 4. We got to chapter 3, chapter 4. He came back after we read that chapter. Next time I saw him, is like, oh my god, this was like the best thing I've ever read. Like this is perfect. I like how everything kind of lays out. And then he finished the book, and then I asked him, I was like, okay, how do you like the rest of the book? He goes, oh, everything was great. And I go, what about now? Think back about what you wrote, what you read before in the first little bit in the book. Now, do you see how everything kind of ties in? And he did. He was appreciative more of what I wrote before that he didn't particularly like. Now he went back and is like, okay, now this makes sense. And now I can see how everything kind of led into another.
That's a good example, and it leads right into that next question that we had talked about, which was for those that are already familiar with Agile, like your friend, what new perspectives or practices might they gain from your book? Do you have any that you want to highlight to kind of pique their interest and see if they
Yeah.
purchase your book and dig into it?
I think one of the things they would really like is how I talk about roadmaps and like kind of the pathways. So there's a chapter that's called Pathway, and initially when I start kind of talking about roadmaps and people talking about roadmaps, they see more as the product roadmap and how to get forward. When I talk about here in this chapter was more how organizations like you're going to have your product roadmap regardless. And I even mentioned this like you're going to have that information, so you're going to have that. But if you don't have a roadmap onto how you want your organization to get better and achieve more success, then whatever your product roadmap is, it's not going to make too much of a difference. You're always going to you're going to struggle with that. But if you have your goals and that from an organization perspective and the pathway of where they're going to go, everything else just falls into place, and it just makes things so much easier to say, okay, this is where we want to achieve. This is where we're going to go. Let's get there.
Yeah, strategic alignment. That is very helpful. What do you enjoy most about working in the field of Agile project management?
I think the one thing I really love is there's no two teams that are the same. There's no two situations that are uh everyone has their own set of challenges. There might be different flavors, it might be similar, but there's still a difference. And I think for me, it's enjoying working with individuals and teams and seeing how working with them to get better at what they do. And I think a lot of people, they don't really they know they got to get better, but they don't understand how much power and how much they can improve and what that does, just not only for them as from a career perspective, but from what will happen within the organization and how they succeed and how it works and how everything all fits in. So for me, every engagement, it's going in, learning about everyone, learning about the organization as a whole, learning about the products, and then from there, working with them and saying, okay, how are we going to deliver this? What's going to make your lives easier? And then once I take that viewpoint and kind of put the question back on them, and I think that really kind of gets a lot of people taken aback. It's like, wow, okay, this is someone that's actually going to listen to me, and now we're working together to get that stuff done. And that's what I always like to. I love the interaction. I love working with everyone. Uh, Even like myself, just within my company, I have a couple of my associates that I work with. We talk a lot. We work together, and it's my poor wife doesn't particularly like me having my stickies all over my walls with all my different boards that I have, but it's uh, it's great. I think it's kind of like it's a definite change in breath of fresh air almost every day.
I agree. I really enjoy the team element on projects, and the name of my company, Collaborative Synergy Consulting, comes from that. Really, I love that
Yep.
collaboration and the synergy that we get when we work together and bring each of our experiences and our personalities and our behaviors, our knowledge. It's just so exciting to see that mix come together. And then I love supporting people. So, helping
Yep.
them to be successful. It sounds like we have a lot in common in that. And I also, like you, have a ton of sticky notes and get them as gifts. My children learned at an early age how to clean the house using a Kanban board and a burn down chart. And they joke about it to this day. In fact, my oldest, as she was getting ready for college, she's like, "Hey, mom, can I use the sticky notes and go put them up on?" We have like two windows on each side of our sliding glass door, and we use them as Kanban columns. And so we'll
Okay.
put in the window our backlog of all the things that need to get done for whatever our project is, whether it's like a dinner party or house cleaning or college, and we'll
Yep.
put them all in there, and then we'll just kind of work through, and everybody knows how to do it. And I've never asked my husband if he minds the sticky notes. I'm sure if I left them there for a long time, it would probably bother him, but he seems to be pretty okay with that. And the kids know it, and it's just kind of our way of like, okay, here we go. We got something we got to work on. Team effort. Grab a sticky note, move it through the columns.
It's amazing. When he was going through his midterms, he was getting a little bit stressed out about it. So I bought him a whiteboard. I put it in his room, created a Kanban board. I was like, okay, what do you got to do? What are your goals for the end of this week? And so we went through his goals, identified all his goals. Okay, let's start breaking down create his backlog. So we created this entire backlog of what he needed to get done and like to get ready. And yeah, he plowed through his midterms. He did it again for his finals just a little ago, and he plowed through them. And he had um, no issues. And he's actually starting to do some of the stuff in the kitchen too, which is kind of neat. He'll go into his labs, and he has obviously can't have a Kanban board in the middle of the lab or in the middle of the kitchen, but he has his notebook and just has everything kind of laid out. And he knows what to do. He's okay. Here's my goal. I'm making uh, chocolate chip cookies, let's just say. And it's like, okay, I need this, this, this. Okay, here's the steps I got to get done. Just like you, just gonna get the board, get stuff done. Here we go.
It helps so much with focus. I love using that as a tool. I use it on projects. I use it in classes. I use it with my kids at work. It's just a great
Yep.
tool. And there's so many automated tools that you can use to kind of keep it with you if you need to take it with you somewhere. But I also just love the
Yeah.
sticky notes. I love the whiteboard. I love books. Like those tangible things are still really cool to me, even though the online stuff is pretty neat as well. Mural's one of my favorite tools, online tools.
Like one of my recent engagements was a jujitsu school, like a martial arts club,
Hmm.
and I taught them Kanban and the Eisenhower matrix. And at first they were like, "No, nah, this isn't going to work. No, trust me, this is going to help you guys." And the engagement ended a month and a half ago. I just reached out to them because they're friends of mine. So it was easy to reach out to them to see how things are going. And they were surprised on how fast they were actually getting a lot of stuff done because they just moved to a new place. And so they still had some construction to do, like some small things here and there. And I think they were just getting themselves overwhelmed with new place, new students, and trying to get everything all finished. Once I showed them how to do this and use Eisenhower to help identify the tickets and how to place them and get their priority, they just always they got things done a lot faster than they thought they would, and they're further ahead. So it's not just software. I think that's kind of the key thing. Like that's part of the behavior. Like that's one of the reasons why I wrote this book was that you don't have to be a software company to be that agile organization. You can just need the behaviors, and you can use any tool you want to get to where you need to go.
It's really about that toolbox that we were talking about at the beginning, right? Sometimes you don't know what tool you need. So when you are expanding that toolbox and bringing in new tools, you have more opportunity to pick a tool that's more efficient. So you're not trying to screw in a screw with a hammer, as you said in the beginning, right? We want to make sure we're using the tool that does the best for that job. And there's so many out there. So continuously improving and learning is really about building that toolbox and applying the right things when you learn them and being open to learning new ones, right?
Exactly.
How do you stay up to date with the latest trends and developments in Agile?
So for me to keep things up to date is just continuously learning. And that's like one of the main tenets of an Agile environment is evolving and learning. So whether it's through blogs, books, posts, any sort of updates that come in that I see coming around, even my peers, whether it's my associates that I work with, someone that they know, or even from other organizations that I talk to. So it's always learning and adapting and taking that information and always having the behaviors and the kind of the frame of mind that I'm trying to get better at what I do, and I want others to get better at what they do. So having that type of kind of frame of mind helps keep the learning going. Because if you just kind of sit still in one spot, you don't go anywhere.
Right. It's great to have that growth mindset, always learning, always continuously improving yourself and helping others as well. So what's next for you? Do you have any upcoming projects or books that we should look out for?
Right now, I'm working on my third book. I just kind of got a high level skeleton of it right now. It's going to focus on we've talked a little bit earlier about cognitive bias and logical fallacies. So it's kind of taking a look at the different fallacies and bias that are out there and how they impact an agile environment, and then how to kind of give a little bit of add more to the toolbox on how you can kind of deal with those bias and those fallacies.
I'm excited to hear more as you get further along in your book. I hope that you'll come back and talk with me and share more with the listeners. But in the meantime, where can our listeners find more information about your work and connect with you?
So my company website is berriaultandassociates.com. Berriault. So it's a nice Canadian French name. You can also reach out to me through LinkedIn. I think I am the only Jeremy Berriault on LinkedIn, period. There might be one more. I do know there's two Jeremy Berriaults on this planet, and I know the other one, he's considerably younger than I am. So just look for the older gentleman and you'll find me.
Sounds good. Well, thank you so much for joining us today. I really enjoyed talking with you and learning more about everything that you're working on and your experience. And I hope that the listeners did as well. I look forward to talking with you more again soon.
Yeah, it was a pleasure being here. And I look forward talking again.
Thank you.